Hello and welcome to this movie night video. Today we are making a tier list for the characters from Money Heist or Casa de Papel. We are going to be looking at them from like a character perspective as opposed to a morality perspective. I don't condone taking people at gunpoint or basically doing any of the things really that the people do in this series. It's more just looking at their characters and like I say, not based on where they are morally. Um, so I'll explain the tiers before we go into it. Basically, imagine that the word city is after each of our tiers. So the best one, capital city. Next up, your second city, worth a day out city. Then an average city, bit of a rubbish city. And our bottom tier today is not even a city. The reason they're cities is because obviously they all, with the exception of the professor, are named after cities. So I thought I'd keep in with the city theme. Without any further ado, let's go straight into it with Manila. Manila is probably like second city. I think that if her character had been given more attention, which to be fair, she already gets like a fair amount. They do look at her past and how she becomes relevant and that kind of thing. She could maybe have been even more interesting, but I think that she does make a good character. I think the way that she's kept undercover for such a long time, she just pretends to be a hostage for so long. I think that she's not someone who even though she does eventually sort of take a gun and force her way into the gang. She accepts like her strategic position for a long time, and she picks just the right moment to intervene, which basically saves them from the fact that Arturo has the gun. So yeah, I think a very solid character Manila is. Next up, we've got Rio, a very very important character of the series. For me, again, yeah, he probably falls into the second city category. He's a very solid character. I mean, he's frequently referred to as the weakest of them, which is kind of fair, kind of not fair. It's fair in the sense that, like, by the standards of fighting and all that sort of thing, yes, he definitely is. But he probably offers a lot more because he like understands the technology and all that kind of thing. I think that his relationship with Tokyo, even though it's explored a lot and takes up a lot of like the talking and the themes, is actually not really that strong. Um, for the sake of the series, really, I don't think that it's actually that interesting. I don't think that they really make that much sense as a couple. Like, obviously, it's well mentioned that she's a lot older than him, and yeah, I think that if I was to give one criticism of the series, that could maybe be it. Actually, that relationship is just not really that interesting, and it's overexplored. But yeah, Rio overall is a solid character, but not quite in the top tier. Next up, we have Moscow. I think is a pretty average character. Um, he's basically just a standard like criminal, I guess. He's obviously like spent some time in prison and he doesn't want to go back to prison, which is basically why he dies because he doesn't take treatment from the outside, which would obviously lead to him going to prison. I think he, yeah, doesn't really. I mean, he's sort of like a father figure in some ways. There's the complexity with him in Denver. I find the like him and Denver dynamic actually a bit weird at times. There, in some ways, almost a bit full on. Like at times, the way that they're almost like best friends, which is maybe a bit unrealistic. Even if like obviously a lot of people have close relationships, think that the way that they do that, it's not that I'm saying people should never be friends with or never have like that kind of relationship, but I think they just overdo it to a point that it's just a bit cringe at times. But yeah, he's just a pretty average character, honestly. Next up, another pretty average character. I think his name's Bogota. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly sure it's Bogota. Again, completely average. He's just like a hard man. I don't really like. I think that, yeah, there's that sort of, again, the romance with Nairobi, but it doesn't really make sense. Again, like, um, it's something that's just thrown in really for the sake of it. I think that, yeah, the relationships in general are actually quite weak. I think that the one maybe with the professor in Lisbon, which we'll come on to a bit later, is a bit better. Um, but that's another one that's just sort of thrown in there for the sake of it, and yeah, not massively impressed with. But yeah, Bogdar's pretty average character. Next up, we have Marseille, who he's worth a day out if he was a city. He's not an amazing character. I think that he has some interesting moments. Maybe one of the slightly more humorous characters. I think he's quite interesting. He's not. I don't think he's too forcefully brought in, but I think you end up getting a lot about his character and the way that he is. obviously his relationship with the professor. There's a lot of flashbacks to him with Berlin, Palermo, and the professor. But yeah, I think that he's like just a fairly solid character, quite interesting, lots of different skills. Um, and yeah, he's a good character. Next up, we have, I think, Oslo. Yeah, Oslo. He's a bit rubbish, really. He's not really that interesting. Let's be honest. I think that yeah, there's just not really that much to say about him. I think probably one of the less explored characters. There's the whole thing about his relationship with Helsinki. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm fairly sure he's the first character to get killed off properly, and you can kind of see why. He's not really that interesting. He doesn't really do that much interesting. He's just a hard man. Next up, Lisbon. I really like Lisbon. Does she make capital or second? I think she does. No, she'll stay in second. Actually, she'll stay in second. I think that Lisbon and the Professor's relationship is like by some distance the most interesting thing that happens in Money Heist. I'd definitely say I most enjoyed that series 1 and 2 where they were simultaneously talking in the heist without obviously the Professor knew, Lisbon doesn't, and then also like they're dating. I thought that was really interesting. That was probably one of my favourite sort of plot twists of any series I can think of. And yeah, I think that she's a very interesting woman. I think that she uses, like, I guess her character, both for obviously her original job, but also as time progresses as someone who's being interrogated um, by Alithia. And yeah, I think that in general she's just a character with quite a lot of sort of maybe like personal strength and character. Um, and so yeah, I think that she makes a really solid character, which is why she gets into the second city. Unfortunate to miss out on Capital. Next up, Denver. Pretty average, honestly. I think that he obviously like is noted for his slightly annoying laugh. Not really noted for that much else. He sort of has the thing with Stockholm, which is like he deludes himself into carrying that on for such a long time. He doesn't really have that many, like, I mean, some people maybe say his humour, but really he doesn't have that many redeeming features for the kind of person that he is. He obviously is someone who has a temper. He does the thing with Stockholm, which is kind of really wrong, and that he obviously just has a relationship with someone that has Stockholm syndrome. Um, but yeah, I don't really see that much more interest. Like, if it wasn't for all that stuff, if actually maybe he goes into a bit rubbish because if it wasn't for all that stuff, he'd just be average. But because he does that stuff as well, I guess he just becomes a bit worse because he's not really got any redeeming features. Um, Next up, we'll save the rest for it later because he's a very important character. We'll go for Berlin, our first not even a city character. Um, Berlin is absolutely rubbish. I can't stand him. They needed to kill him off when they did. He's just too much. Like, he doesn't. Again, he has no redeeming features, but the stuff that he does is just so bad in comparison to so many other people. He's like basically raping the girl that, sort of wants to be with him for the sake of her own freedom and like self continuity that she won't die. Completely takes advantage of her. Yeah, there's just nothing really good about Bert. I think yeah, just the sort of classic worst of pretty much anyone in the series generally, except maybe some of the people that torture people as well, because that's also very wrong. Next up, we have Tokyo, who obviously voices over the majority of the series. I think that Tokyo is like an interesting character. I mean, I've already mentioned the fact that I don't really think that the relationship adds that much with Rio, but I think that maybe she gets a bit more screen time than she's worth in a way. Like, I think that she's the main character because she's very erratic. She's the sort of classic criminal. Um, but I think I'll actually go for average because she gets so heavily explored. But I think that when you actually think of how much you get out of her in comparison to other characters, when you think of how much more screen time she gets, it's not actually that much. I don't think that she's that interesting a character. I just think that she has a lot of screen time, so a lot of things get explored. Um, but yeah, I don't think there's really that many interesting features. She's basically just a sort of crazy person who needs the professor to help her, and she never really goes away from that. She always is just a bit erratic, a bit crazy. Um, Even if she obviously does have certain ways in which she does have a caring side, but don't see that much about her character that makes her that compelling, because I guess everyone has at least some little bit of some caring side. So I don't think you can really claim that as a really interesting aspect of her character. Next up, Nairobi, who goes straight into Capital. Nairobi, probably my personal favourite character, because I think that she's someone who really does go well for the way that like they balance her character out. I think that she's well balanced. Like there is the acknowledgement that she does a lot of bad things, but at the same time, I just think that she has that bit more. I think there's she kind of comes off as like slightly more genuine than Tokyo. Is in with Tokyo, I'm not saying that she doesn't care about the people, because she does, but I just think with Nairobi, she's really attached. I think the fact that she looks after Alison Parker if you're going really back early on, and she sort of encourages her to stand up for herself. She's almost like a big sister kind of role. Like not just with that, but in terms of the way she is, she's quite. I don't know. Like she does look out for people in a certain way. And yeah, she does have a lot of redeeming features, I would say. So I think that, yeah, Nairobi probably is up there as a very good character. Next up, we have Palermo. I mean, I don't even know why they wrote him in, to be honest. I think he's a terrible character. I think he's just not really that interesting for any reason. He's basically there just to replace Berlin as like the biggest dickhead, but he's not even that good at that. He's just a bit unbearable, to be honest. He tells the guy how to get out. He tells Gandia how to escape. Um, he's just completely power hungry. I think that he's sort of like an attempt at being the classic soldier, the leader, but why he's even friends with the professor in the first place makes very little sense, and maybe it's a bit of a plot hole because the professor's obviously made out to be an extremely intelligent person, so it doesn't really make sense why he would want to be around someone who is that obviously like a really bad person and doesn't really have that many redeeming features. He's not even that competent. Like he's not even got the competency to justify the leadership and with all the problems it has. He's just a guy that's bad and doesn't have really that much more interesting about him. So yeah, that's why he falls there. Helsinki, completely average. Again, a bit like Oslo, kind of boring. I guess the only reason he makes average is because he's slightly more interesting. And I think that they kind of kill the relationship with Nairobi when they sort of say that she loves him, because I don't really see why that's needed. I think it would have been much better if that wasn't included. Um, but yeah, I think that Helsinki, like, there's a bit more about him than Oslo included, but in general, he's not the most interesting character. Um, Next up, Stockholm. Stockholm, actually, I'm going to put into second city tier. I think that. Actually, no, do you know what? I'm going to put her in capital tier. I think that she's a pretty compelling character in the sense that she's someone who's basically taken advantage of by Denver. She's almost aware of that. I mean, okay, that's kind of unrealistic that she's does call herself Stockholm, is aware that she has Stockholm syndrome, but carries on anyway. Um, but I think that there's just something interesting about the way that she realizes that she's implicated herself. She's a hostage that becomes part of the gang. Yes, it's all completely unrealistic, but I do think that she makes her a really interesting character. Um, just because of that complexity and how she obviously changes over the series. There are obviously other people that do as well, but I think that she just has something that's quite interesting, and the fact that she had the affair with Arturo but still looks after the baby and she has that complicated thing to deal with. I do think that she makes for a very interesting character. Finally, I've left pretty much the main character, you'd say, and alongside Tokyo maybe until last, and that's the professor. For me, I think he may be between second and Worth a Day Out. I go for Worth a Day Out because I think that he's not like. I think that they just do too much with his character. I think he's more interesting at the start, actually. He's more interesting when he's someone who's intelligent and also, like a bit charming with the way he is with Lisbon. But I think that as it goes on, he sort of, like, they basically try to make him into some Superman. I think that when they throw in the fact that he beats up Alberto, who's the ex-husband of Lisbon in that scene, I just think it gets to a point where it just is completely unrealistic. They basically give him almost every good trait. Like, they give him the genius brains, the ability to be really flirtatious, the charisma, the fighting skills. It just gets to a point where they're trying too much with him. Um, the reason that he actually probably stays above average is just because of how he is. He's so compelling in the earlier bits, but yeah, as it goes on, they just did way too much with the professor for me, up to a point that it became beyond unrealistic. Although to be fair, the series you could both say that of the series in general, but you could also say it is a series, so it doesn't matter that much. But yeah, for me, that's where he is worth. Anyway, if you have opinions of your own, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening to and watching this video, and I'll see you next time.